Wind loaded with volcanic ash scraped across the concrete walls of the bunker as Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto crouched inside, his hands shaking while he wrote lines that would have meant immediate execution if any officer found them. What he put on the page was something no Japanese soldier was permitted to admit. The Marines are not human. They do not fall the way ordinary men do. Everything we were told about American weakness was a lie. He wasn't writing out of fear, but from pure disbelief. Only minutes earlier, through the narrow firing slit, he had witnessed something that shattered every lesson drilled into him since basic training. 6 U.S. Marines had charged his position straight into machine gun fire. 3 were cut down instantly, yet the others pushed forward with a determination Yamamoto had never seen in China, Burma, or anywhere the Imperial Army had fought. When his fellow defenders hurled grenades to stop them, one Marine threw himself onto the explosions to protect his squad. Bleeding heavily, barely able to stand, that same Marine kept fighting until the weapon simply slipped out of his hands. Within minutes, the Marines overran the emplacement. There were 21,000 Japanese troops on Iwo Jima, buried inside a web of 18 kilometers of tunnels, bunkers, and hidden firing points. They had been promised the Americans would break, that the Marines were pampered, soft recruits from a decadent democracy, unable to endure real hardship. But in those few minutes, Yamamoto realized the truth. The Imperial Army had completely misjudged its enemy. The real cost of that mistake would be written not in strategy briefings or propaganda, but in the brutal mathematics of close-quarters combat. Combat that would leave 26,000 Marines killed or wounded in only 36 days. And for Japan's defenders, this was only the beginning. August 7th, 1942, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. Years before Iwo Jima, the illusion of Japanese superiority had already begun to crumble. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, on a jungle-covered island the Imperial Army believed it could seize in a matter of days. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, a veteran of the China campaign where Japanese troops had rolled over enemy positions with near-invincible momentum, wrote a stunned diary entry after only a week of fighting on Guadalcanal. The Americans here are unlike any enemy we have faced. They do not retreat when surrounded. They do not surrender when defeat is certain. Most troubling of all, they fight at night, as though darkness gives them strength instead of fear. Guadalcanal was Japan's first major defensive battle in the Pacific. Tokyo expected an easy victory. The U.S. 1st Marine Division, barely 16,000 men, was described by Japanese intelligence as elite, but still American, supposedly softened by democracy and individual comfort. Within days, every assumption collapsed. Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome commanded a reinforced company ordered to retake Henderson Field on the night of August 20th. His unit, 200 seasoned soldiers who had crushed far larger Chinese formations, advanced confidently, certain the Marines would panic in darkness. Instead, the Marines were waiting. They held perfectly prepared positions with overlapping machine gun fire that carved gaps through Fukudome's formation. What stunned him wasn't the defensive fire, it was what happened next. The Marines counterattacked. They surged into the jungle at night, moving quickly, silently, and with an aggressiveness that violated every Japanese tactical assumption. Their automatic weapons tore through the darkness with deadly precision. Fukudome's diary, recovered after his death 3 days later, recorded his disbelief. They attacked us in the night. We are the ones who attack at night. They moved through terrain we considered impossible. They killed in silence and then vanished. By dawn, only 90 of my men remained. The Americans lost 12. This pattern repeated across Guadalcanal. Japanese troops, accustomed to enemies breaking under banzai charges, found Marines who refused to fall back, who fought hand-to-hand with bayonets, knives, and trenching tools, even fists when ammunition ran dry. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, after surviving 4 months of brutal combat before evacuation, wrote in a letter later intercepted by U.S. intelligence, "We were told Americans lack discipline, that they will not die for one another. Lies. I watched a Marine gunner fire his weapon with both legs shattered until we killed him at arm's length. His assistant took his place instantly." We lost 40 men trying to silence those 2. The shock began here, on Guadalcanal, where Japanese soldiers first realized the Marines were not the enemy they had been promised, but something far more dangerous. 1943 to 1944, the emergence of a new type of warrior. News of the Marines' behavior on Guadalcanal spread quickly through Japanese intelligence channels. Among the soldiers preparing for the next island battles was Private Tadashi Yamamoto, the same man who would one day die on Iwo Jima. In early 1943, during a briefing meant to prepare troops for future encounters, Yamamoto first heard a description of the Marines that unsettled the entire room. The instructor, a staff officer who had personally interrogated captured Americans, did not sound triumphant. He sounded disturbed. The American Marines undergo training that would be considered criminal abuse in any civilized army, he explained. They are torn apart mentally and physically, then rebuilt into something unrecognizable from the soft civilians they once were. They are taught that surrender is shameful, that death in combat is honorable, and that their duty is to fight until they can no longer move. Then came the line that made Yamamoto feel cold. They have taken our Bushido and combined it with American industry. This was a truth Japanese planners were not prepared to face. Japan's soldiers trained under a warrior code that glorified death before dishonor, but they did so with weapons increasingly inferior to the Americans. The Marines, on the other hand, endured training nearly as brutal as Japanese recruits, producing fighters equally willing to die, yet armed with superior firepower and supported by a nation capable of producing endless replacements. The contrast became undeniable on Tarawa, November 20th, 1943. Rear Admiral Keiji Shibasaki commanded 4,500 defenders on a fortress he claimed was impossible to capture. The 2nd Marine Division proved him wrong in 76 hours. Private First Class Tadashi Ogawa, one of only 17 Japanese survivors, described what he saw. The first wave died in the water. We killed hundreds. The second wave was slaughtered on the beach, but they kept coming. The third wave reached us with flamethrowers. They did not stop until we were dead, or they were. The numbers were unforgiving. Nearly 6,400 men died on Tarawa in just over 3 days. The Marines suffered staggering losses, but still took every objective. This forced Japanese intelligence to reconsider everything they believed about the Marines. On Saipan in 1944, captured documents revealed their revised assessment. Marine units exhibit shock troop characteristics and fanatical devotion to mission objectives. Marines do not retreat. Marines counterattack even when outnumbered or tactically disadvantaged. Marine combat effectiveness remains intact until the unit is annihilated. The Imperial Japanese Army had fought many enemies before, Chinese, British, Dutch, Russians, but none like this. Captain Yoshio Kobayashi, a Guadalcanal survivor, summarized it bluntly. The American Army fights sensibly. The Marines fight differently. They advance regardless of casualties. Their willingness to accept losses is unlike anything in modern warfare. What Japan discovered was not simply an opponent with better equipment. They had encountered a military force whose training, doctrine, and national industry aligned with frightening precision, a force that would not stop, could not be intimidated, and refused to break. And this realization would only deepen in the battles to come. 1944, when Japanese commanders realized the Marines couldn't be stopped. As the Pacific War dragged on, Japanese officers began noticing a disturbing and unprecedented pattern. It wasn't simply that the Marines won battles. They won them at speeds and at costs no rational commander should accept, and yet they kept advancing as if casualties meant nothing. Lieutenant Colonel Kunio Nakagawa learned this firsthand on Peleliu. Japan had studied previous American landings and built its defensive plans around one consistent assumption. After hitting the beaches, American forces would pause, reorganize, and carefully prepare for inland assaults. But the Marines didn't pause. They landed on the morning of September 15, 1944, and by nightfall they had already seized half the airfield, one of the most heavily defended areas of the island. Nakagawa later wrote in disbelief, "My defensive plan collapsed because it assumed the enemy would behave rationally. The Marines do not behave rationally. They act with absolute commitment regardless of circumstances." This irrationality was actually a deliberate doctrine. To Japanese soldiers it appeared suicidal. To Marine commanders it was calculated aggression. A chilling example came from Bougainville, recounted by Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto, who watched a Marine platoon attack a fortified hilltop position shielded by 3 interconnected bunkers. According to every rule of Japanese doctrine, the Americans should have paused, brought in artillery, and used smoke to cover their advance. Instead, the Marine lieutenant examined the battlefield for less than half a minute and ordered a direct assault. The result was staggering. 7 Marines were killed in the first 20 seconds. The survivors reached the first bunker and destroyed it with grenades and explosives. 3 more fell, taking the second bunker. The last 5 men standing eliminated the third bunker. Out of 37 Marines, 12 became casualties. Yet the entire position, deemed impregnable by Japanese standards, fell in 4 minutes. To Japanese observers, this wasn't conventional bravery. It was something far more unsettling. The Marines treated casualties as a tactical currency, something to be spent without hesitation if the objective justified it. Japanese officers, trained to conserve manpower whenever possible, were horrified. A commander on Iwo Jima later put it bluntly, "How do you defend against an enemy who will spend half his men to destroy one of your positions?" This created a psychological nightmare for Japanese defenders. Defend lightly, and the Marines broke through. Defend heavily, and Marines destroyed the position anyway, while weakening the rest of the defensive line. Abandon the position, and the terrain was lost without slowing the Americans at all. Every choice led to defeat. The only question was how fast. Major Yoshi Takahuri, a senior staff officer on Iwo Jima who survived the battle, explained the mathematical certainty of the situation. "We inflicted casualties that would have halted any other army. More than 20,000 Marines fell in 36 days, yet their attacks never slowed. We believed 10,000 casualties would halt their advance for a week. They suffered that in 7 days and pressed on without pause." Japan faced a brutal truth. The Marines could be bled, but not stopped. They could be killed, but not broken. They would keep coming, no matter the price. And as the war continued, Japanese commanders began to fear not just the Marines' firepower, but their terrifying willingness to pay any cost for victory. 1944, when logistics became a weapon. As the island campaign intensified, Japanese soldiers discovered a truth even more demoralizing than Marine aggressiveness. The Americans were fighting a different kind of war entirely, one powered by industry, not endurance. Second Lieutenant Toshio Yamamoto, unrelated to Tadashi Yamamoto, captured on Saipan, described the moment this realization struck him. 3 days after the American landings, he led a reconnaissance patrol expecting to find exhausted Marines clinging to survival, just as Japanese soldiers would have been after such brutal fighting. Instead, he found something unimaginable. The Marines were eating hot food. Ammunition trucks moved freely. Their wounded were treated in large medical tents. Units rotated off the line to rest. Their supply dumps had more shells than my entire regiment. The Americans were waging industrial warfare, with the Marines as the cutting edge of a machine Japan could not match. Japanese defenders lived on starvation rations. Marines fought like they were back in garrison. Japanese troops often survived on a handful of rice a day. Marines received fresh meals, boiled water, medical care, and unlimited ammunition. Japanese wounded usually died. Marines were evacuated within hours and returned to combat weeks later. This wasn't just a difference, it was a different universe. The longer a battle lasted, the stronger the Marines became. The longer a battle lasted, the weaker the Japanese became. This dynamic proved catastrophic on Peleliu, where Colonel Nakagawa's defenders expected the island to fall in a week. Instead, the Marines fought 11 weeks, taking the island inch by inch while suffering some of the heaviest casualties of the war. Japan inflicted over 10,000 American casualties, but the Americans simply rotated fresh units into the line. Japan had no such luxury. The math was merciless. Every American casualty was treated, evacuated, and usually replaced. Every Japanese casualty was permanent. Ammunition shortages plagued every Japanese unit. Marine resupply ships delivered thousands of tons daily. By mid-1944, Japanese intelligence summaries finally admitted the truth commanders had whispered privately. Marine assaults cannot be stopped, they can only be delayed. Captured documents on Tinian revealed even more brutal guidance. Do not expect to hold positions permanently. Your purpose is to buy time, not victory. Stockpile ammunition, reinforcements will not come. Understand that the position will fall. Die with honor. This was no longer strategy, it was admission of futility. Japan's new objective was not to win battles. It was to make each battle so costly that America might reconsider invading Japan itself. But Marines, by accepting horrific losses and continuing to attack, nullified even this desperate plan. They paid whatever price was required, and then paid more. Private Tadashi Ogawa, one of the handful of survivors from Tarawa, later described the moment Japanese soldiers realized the war was unwinnable. We believed if we killed enough Marines, they would turn back. Instead, they stepped over their dead and kept coming. We fought for days, killed thousands, and they still took the island on schedule. For the Japanese defenders, the conclusion was devastatingly clear. An enemy who will pay any cost cannot be defeated by making victory expensive. And this truth would haunt every Japanese soldier from Saipan to Iwo Jima. 1942 to 1944, when Japan met America's silent killers. Before General Kuribayashi designed his labyrinth of defenses on Iwo Jima, before Japanese troops fully understood the scale of American industrial power, they encountered another Marine force, one far smaller but terrifyingly effective. These were the Marine Raiders, elite units created for deep penetration missions, night assaults, and unconventional warfare. Their tactics would later spread to the entire Marine Corps, but in 1942, Japanese forces had no idea such troops even existed. Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki learned this the hard way. In August 1942, Ichiki led 900 hand-picked veterans, men who had crushed Chinese formations through ferocious night attacks. Japanese doctrine was absolute. Americans feared the dark. Night belonged to Japan. Ichiki launched a textbook night assault across the Tenaru River on Guadalcanal, confident he would sweep aside the Marines defending the far bank. But waiting in the shadows were the 1st Marine Raider Battalion, rifles ready, machine guns pre-sighted, artillery registered. At 1:30 a.m., as Ichiki's men waded into the river, the raiders opened fire at point-blank range. The battle lasted 20 minutes. Over 700 Japanese soldiers were killed. Marine casualties, 35. The survivors staggered back in disbelief. Nothing in their training had prepared them for this kind of enemy. The raiders fought like ghosts. They launched nighttime probes, infiltrated Japanese lines, struck suddenly and vanished. By 1944, although the raiders were formally disbanded and folded into regular Marine divisions, their tactics had already reshaped the entire corps. Night fighting stopped being a Japanese advantage. It became a Japanese weakness. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, who fought on 3 islands before his capture on Okinawa, summed up what it felt like. There was no night anymore. No safe time, no moment to rest. The Marines attacked by day with overwhelming firepower, and by night with small units that slipped into our positions like phantoms. This was something the Imperial Japanese Army had never encountered. A force that fought 24 hours a day, with relentless pressure that shattered morale. And the pressure was everywhere. Daylight brought. Carrier aircraft pounding supply lines, naval guns obliterating trenches, artillery firing continuously, tanks burning out bunkers, Marines advancing with methodical precision. Night brought, silent patrols cutting throats, infiltration teams collapsing entire positions, ambushes that struck without warning, harassment fire that denied Japanese troops any rest. The Japanese had built their doctrine around controlling the night. The Marines took that doctrine away and turned it against them. Second Lieutenant Saburo Endo, an artillery observer on Saipan, recorded this nightmare in his diary as he watched a Marine landing. Their warships shelled us for hours. Their planes bombed us without pause. Their infantry advanced behind tanks and artillery fire. When night fell, we expected a break. There was none. The Marines continued the attack in darkness with perfect coordination. The lesson was becoming clear. Spirit alone could not stop a military machine that never slept. And as the war neared its final catastrophic island campaigns, Japan would soon learn that the raiders were only the beginning, that the entire Marine Corps was evolving into something far more dangerous. By the middle of 1944, Japanese commanders had learned a grim truth. The Marines did not win through courage alone. They won through a cold, systematic application of overwhelming firepower. Spirit, bravery, and Bushido meant nothing against a military machine designed to annihilate anything in its path. Second Lieutenant Saburo Endo, an artillery forward observer on Saipan, documented this with chilling clarity. Watching the Marines come ashore in June 1944, he described not a battle, but an industrial process. Their ships shelled us for 3 hours before the first landing craft even approached. Their aircraft bombed us for 2 hours before that. When the Marines landed, every movement was protected by tanks, artillery, naval guns, and planes. They advanced slowly, carefully, destroying everything in their way. This was not the kind of warfare Japan had prepared for. The Marines did not maneuver around strong points. They erased them. A fortified bunker? Artillery delivered hundreds of shells. Survivors? Tanks with flamethrowers burned them alive. Still resistance? Battleships flattened the entire position with 16-inch shells. Only then did infantry advance. It was mechanical, brutal, and terrifyingly effective. Lieutenant Shigeru Fukudome, killed on Guadalcanal, left behind one of the most thorough Japanese analyses of Marine combined arms tactics. The Marines do not fight as individual soldiers. They fight as parts of a single machine. Riflemen pin us in place. Machine gunners suppress our fire. Mortars blind our observers. Artillery destroys our bunkers. Tanks advance with infantry behind them. Aircraft strike any position artillery cannot reach. All of this happens within minutes of first contact. Japan had no answer to this. Their commanders could not issue orders fast enough. Marine sergeants were already attacking from a new direction. This exposed a fundamental difference in doctrine. In the Imperial Army, decisions flowed top-down. In the Marine Corps, decisions were made at the lowest possible level. A Marine sergeant could redirect an assault, call in air support, or change objectives without waiting for permission. A Japanese captain often needed approval from battalion or regimental officers. By the time orders arrived, the battlefield had already changed. Speed, not just firepower, became the Marines' deadliest weapon. The Japanese defenders were often reacting to battles that were already over. But of all the weapons in the Marines' arsenal, one caused fear unlike any other. The flamethrower. Japanese soldiers trained to die with honor could accept a bullet, a bayonet, even artillery. But fire was different. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, captured on Okinawa with severe burns over much of his body, explained the psychological devastation. We were taught to die bravely. But there is no honor in burning. You hear the screaming. You smell your comrades burning alive. Fire removes all dignity. It is not death in battle, it is slaughter. For the Japanese, flamethrowers represented something monstrous. Modern war stripped of its last fragments of tradition and ritual, and the Marines used them relentlessly. Every cave, every tunnel, every bunker became a furnace. To the Japanese defenders, this was not warfare, it was extermination. As Endo wrote in one of his final diary entries, we fought with rifles and light machine guns. The Marines fought with the full power of an industrial empire. We never had a chance. By late 1944, Japanese troops across the Pacific were fighting with a heavy burden. The knowledge that everything they had been told about the Americans was a lie. For years, propaganda had painted US forces as soft, undisciplined, and afraid of hardship. But the Marines who waded ashore on Saipan, Peleliu, and Iwo Jima shattered those illusions one after another. Captured documents from Tinian revealed the full extent of Japan's internal panic. Military intelligence, once so confident, now described the Marines with a mixture of dread and resignation. Marines are physically larger and stronger than Japanese soldiers due to superior lifetime nutrition. Their equipment is more reliable. Their marksmanship is exceptional. They receive unlimited ammunition and supplies. They fight without fear of death or surrender. They will not withdraw regardless of casualties. It was everything Japanese soldiers had once believed about themselves. The Banzai charge that should have worked. Saipan, 1944. The breaking point came during one of the largest Banzai charges of the entire war. On the night of July 7, 1944, Colonel Takuya Takashima led nearly 3,000 Japanese troops in a final all-out assault on American lines. Traditional doctrine insisted such an attack, carried out with total commitment, would overwhelm any Western force through sheer ferocity. The Marines of the 27th Infantry Division were asleep when the screaming mass of soldiers crashed into their positions around 3 a.m. By every rule of war, the Marines should have broken. They didn't. Instead, they counterattacked. Machine guns, rifles, pistols, bayonets, even entrenching tools were used in desperate close-quarter fighting as Marines rallied in small groups, refusing to yield so much as a meter of ground. By dawn, 3,000 Japanese soldiers were dead. Marine casualties, 337, 90 killed, 247 wounded. Private First Class Tishi Yoshida, wounded but alive, later said in interrogation, "We were told Americans fear close combat. We charged expecting them to run. They fought with a fury equal to ours. I saw a Marine sergeant kill 7 men before he fell. This was not cowardice. We had been lied to." The myth of American weakness dies on Guadalcanal. Japanese troops boasted that American soldiers couldn't endure hunger, heat, or jungle conditions. But they watched Marines survive in foxholes filled with water, slog through mud for weeks, fight in brutal heat, and operate with a discipline that stunned even hardened veterans. Corporal Kenji Matsumoto, who fought on multiple islands before capture, described the moment morale finally collapsed. "We were starving by September 1942. Marines ate 3 meals a day. They received ammunition, medical supplies, water, and fresh troops constantly. We realized we were fighting an enemy who would never run out of anything. That knowledge broke something inside us. The medical miracle that Japan couldn't match. Every Japanese soldier knew a wound meant death. No medicine, no antibiotics, no evacuation, no hope. But Japanese prisoners were stunned to see Marines with horrific wounds survive. Men who would have died in Japanese units walked again because of American surgery, plasma transfusions, and evacuation by air or sea. It felt supernatural. It felt unfair. And it drained the last belief Japan had in its own superiority. The final humiliation. After the surrender. When the war ended in August 1945, many Japanese soldiers expected Marine occupation forces to torture or execute them. Their officers had sworn this would happen. Instead, they were given food, water, medical care, and shelter. Private Yoshida, repatriated in 1946, wrote, "The Americans treated us better in defeat than our officers treated us in battle. We were not fighting barbarians. We were the barbarians." Thousands of returning soldiers echoed this realization. The officers had lied. The propaganda had lied. The empire had lied. And nothing symbolized that betrayal more than the enemy they fought, the Marines, who embodied everything Japan claimed to be, backed by everything Japan could never produce. Every Japanese soldier stationed on Iwo Jima knew exactly what was coming. They had heard the stories from Saipan, Tarawa, Peleliu, and Guadalcanal. They had read the intelligence reports that painted the Marines not as a mere enemy, but as an unstoppable force of nature. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, arguably the most brilliant defensive commander Japan fielded in the entire war, understood this better than anyone. As he prepared Iwo Jima's defenses throughout late 1944, he wrote to his wife, "I am ordered to defend Iwo Jima against the Marines. This is a mathematical problem with only one solution. They will land with overwhelming numbers. They will have complete control of the air and sea. They will bring unlimited supplies. We cannot defeat them. We can only make them bleed." His plan reflected this grim reality. On Iwo Jima he constructed 11 miles of tunnels, 1,500 interconnected caves and bunkers, multiple fallback positions, artillery zeroed in on every beach, machine gun nests designed to fire even after being isolated. For the first time in the Pacific War, the Japanese did not meet the Marines at the water's edge. They let them land, then they opened fire. February 19, 1945, D-Day on Iwo Jima. Naval bombardment had barely scratched the defenses. The Marines came ashore in neat formation, straight into a killing field. Japanese artillery ripped into the black volcanic sand. Entire companies were cut down in minutes. But something happened that Kuribayashi expected, and yet still could not fully comprehend. The Marines did not fall back. They advanced into the artillery fire. When machine gun nests halted their progress, Marines crawled forward under blistering fire to destroy them. When those Marines died, others took their place. The attack never stopped, not for a moment. Private First Class Tadashi Yamamoto watched this from his bunker as Marines assaulted the position to his right. His diary recorded what Japanese troops had no words for: A flamethrower team approached the bunker. We killed the first Marine. His assistant took the weapon. We killed him. Another took his place. We shot him and he crawled forward while burning. Then demolition teams arrived and the bunker fell. How do you stop men who will not stop? That same scene played out across the island hundreds of times. The numbers tell the horror. 70,000 Marines landed, 26,000 became casualties, nearly 7,000 killed. Of 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 surrendered because they were unconscious or too wounded to resist. Japanese troops fought to the last man. The Marines kept coming anyway. Kuribayashi, still alive late into March, sent a final message to Tokyo. The Marines are the most formidable soldiers I have encountered. Their training is superior. Their junior leaders make decisions faster than we can react. Their firepower is overwhelming. But their most terrifying trait is this: they never stop attacking. The psychological breaking point. Japanese officers had always believed every soldier, no matter how fanatical, had a limit. The Marines proved them wrong. Sergeant Kenji Matsumoto later said in captivity, "You could kill half a Marine unit and the survivors would continue the attack. You could kill their officers and the sergeants would take over. You could kill those sergeants and the corporals would lead. There was no point where they broke." To the defenders, this wasn't war anymore. It was annihilation. And Japan could not match the pace. When entire Marine divisions were reduced to fragments, the US simply replaced their men and launched the next assault. After taking 40% casualties, the 3rd, 4th and 5th Marine Divisions were ready for new operations within weeks. The final realization: Private Yamamoto, dying in a bunker on March 10th, wrote his last entry. "We believed spirit would defeat material strength, but the Marines have both. They fight with courage equal to ours, and with weapons we cannot match. Everything we believed was reversed. They are what we claimed to be. We are what we claimed they were." The next morning his bunker was destroyed after a 6-hour fight that delayed the Marines by just 40 minutes. It was a perfect symbol of the entire campaign. Japanese bravery bought time, but never victory. Post-war reflections. The enemy that could not be stopped. By the end of the Pacific War, one truth had spread through every Japanese unit from Saipan to Okinawa. The Marines were the enemy they feared most. Not because of numbers alone, not because of superior weapons alone, but because the Marines combined everything Japan valued and everything Japan lacked. The Marines were what Japan claimed to be. Japanese soldiers had been raised on the belief that spirit conquers material. Courage can overcome firepower, discipline outweighs numbers, death before surrender is the highest virtue. But on every island, Japanese defenders found themselves fighting an enemy who shared these traits, while also possessing limitless industrial support, overwhelming artillery, naval gunfire that erased entire hills, air superiority, better training, faster decision-making, medical care that saved wounds fatal to Japanese soldiers. The result was inevitable. Marine training, the transformation. Japan misunderstood. Captured documents from Saipan included an interrogation report from a Marine prisoner who explained boot camp. His words stunned Japanese officers. The first 4 weeks they destroy the civilian Innu. The second 4 weeks they build the Marine. The Japanese interrogators recognized the first part. They did the same to their own recruits. But the second part? That had no equivalent in the Imperial Army. The Marines created a deep, unbreakable identity, a brotherhood that made retreat or surrender unthinkable. To fail meant betraying every Marine who had come before. This was a psychological weapon Japan never anticipated. The last Banzai charge that proved everything wrong. Colonel Takashima's massive Banzai charge on Saipan showed the truth Japan did not want to admit. Americans were not weak. They would not run. They met Japan's most sacred tactic head-on and destroyed it. Private Tishi Yoshida said it best. "We were told Americans fear close combat. We attacked expecting them to flee. They fought us hand to hand and defeated us. We were the ones who had been lied to." The weight of American industry. By 1945, Japanese generals privately admitted that the war had been unwinnable from the start. Intelligence reports from late 1944 noted that a Marine division shattered at Peleliu, losing 75% of its strength, returned to full power within 3 months. Those replacements then fought on Iwo Jima as effectively as veterans. Japan had no such replacement system. Every Japanese casualty was permanent. Every Marine casualty was replaced. Medical care, life versus death. Japan's wounded almost always died. No antibiotics, no blood plasma, no evacuation, no surgeons, no supplies. Marines, by contrast, were evacuated within hours, given advanced medical treatment, and often returned to battle. To Japanese soldiers, it seemed like Americans had found a way to cheat death. After the surrender, the final blow to propaganda. When the war ended and Marines occupied Japan, many civilians and soldiers expected torture or execution. Their officers had sworn Americans were monsters. Instead, Marines distributed food, provided medical treatment, ensured order, treated civilians with respect. Private Yoshida, repatriated in 1946, wrote, "The Marines treated us better in defeat than our own officers treated us in victory. We were not fighting savages. We were the savages." This shattered whatever remained of pre-war ideology. Kuribayashi's last message before Iwo Jima fell, General Kuribayashi sent a final transmission, the most honest assessment any Japanese officer ever gave. "I have fought the Marines for 31 days. They are the finest soldiers I have encountered. Their training is exceptional. Their courage equals ours. Their equipment and fire support are overwhelming. But most of all, they never stop attacking. Japan cannot defeat such men." The final lesson learned in blood. Japanese veterans who survived the war spoke almost identically decades later. The Marines were not unbeatable because of equipment, nor because of courage alone, but because of a terrifying combination of relentless spirit, industrial strength, decentralized leadership, unbreakable identity, acceptance of massive casualties, overwhelming fire support, unlimited logistics, spirit versus spirit. A fair fight. Spirit versus spirit plus material. That was the end. Corporal Hideo Takahashi, interviewed in 1975, summed up what countless Japanese soldiers realized too late. "We believed spirit could defeat machines. The Marines showed us that spirit with machines defeats spirit alone. They were willing to die, as willing as we were. But they had tanks, shells, planes, medicine, and a nation behind them. We had rifles and courage. It was never enough." And so, island by island, the Marines proved the war's final brutal truth. Japan lost not because it lacked courage, but because it faced an enemy who possessed courage and everything else. The Marines embodied that totality, and Japanese soldiers feared them above all others, because they knew the Marines would take the objective, pay any price, and never stop coming.